Perhaps I permitted myself to be incapacitated by the way that he came at 3 in the evening. He thumped delicately for a man of his height, massive as he was at 6'4", with wide shoulders and large, bushy knuckles. At the point when I asked how I could help him, he ventured into his jacket pocket, pulled out an envelope, and held it out to me. Who wears a coat in August? I took the envelope and looked it over. Its face was stepped north a few times with data for the St. Louis Remedial Office. A letter from jail. Fantastic. I didn't know anybody in jail. Then, at that point, I saw a post-it note paperclipped to the rear of the envelope. It read just, "Kindly permit the dispatch to be available to observe the perusing of this letter." I gazed toward the man overshadowing me on the patio. However, he was huge. He didn't seem compromising. Regardless, his quiet grin made me figure he may be somewhat well-disposed. I inquired as to whether he had any hint about the items in the letter, or why his presence was fundamental for the perusing, yet the tall man shrugged and signaled towards the anteroom. I gestured and welcomed him in. In the kitchen, we both sat opposite each other at the table. I offered him some espresso, yet he quietly declined. Looking up at him one final time, I stripped the fold back and took out a 10-page letter, scrawn in rushed penmanship on lined yellow paper. The letter started, "You don't have any acquaintances with me. You won't probably ever meet me. I'm waiting for capital punishment at the St. Louis Remedial Office. I was secured for the homicide of my significant other and 2 kids. Lionel was 3. Mechi was only a half-year-old. I adored them beyond all doubt. Yet, I will concede that above all else. I disdain myself for myself, and I decay in my cell, tormented by the pictures of their blood trickling off my knuckles. Allow me to recount to you my story." I thought back up at the tall man with disdain clear all over. His quiet, delicate smile didn't falter as he gazed back at me. I got up to get a glass of water. Then, at that point, got back exactly. The creator of the letter, whose name I found out was Fitzwillard, had been detained 14 days prior and had started work on his letter when he approached Fixed. He never made sense of how he got my location or why he picked me to impart his story to. In any case, the story was severe. Fitzwillard professed to have been reviled. My most memorable idea was that he experienced schizophrenia, yet he made sense of that he had been tried for it without any outcomes. He demanded that an evil soul was connected to him. The shrewd soul insulted him, tormented him constantly. It murmured fiendish deeds in his ear as he lay in bed around evening time. It showed up in his appearance as he strolled past the mirror. The devil was continually recommending savageries and filling Fitz's mind with uncertainties and fears and vile thoughts. Fitz's everyday life became baffled by a running critique on the shortcoming of people, the slightness of tissue, and the opportunity of blood draining. Work gatherings became spooky by the evil spirits shrieking. The soul murmured horrendous things about each face Fitz passed in the city. The most exceedingly terrible still, however, was the devil's considerations on Fitz's loved ones. He called Fitz's better half a prostitute, called the kids unreasonable mongrels. The devil let Fitz know that his family didn't see the value in him, that his significant other was undermining him, that his kids couldn't bear being around him, that Fitz would never give enough to them, that their home was a pen, that their garments were clothes, that all that Fitz had pursued for what seems like forever was an unremarkable joke. Best case scenario, for 10 pages, Fitzwillard related the frenzy that crawled into his mind, the bad dreams that woke him many times each evening, The evil spirit made lights gleam as Fitz strolled under them. He made the bath run red, similar to blood. Flies accumulated on the mirrors. Also, the evil spirit's ideas ended up being increasingly angry. They became requests, dangers, even until, at some point, Fitz collapsed the skulls of his 2 baby kids with his uncovered clenched hands prior to choking his better half of 8 years so hard that he cracked the vertebrae in her neck before she, at long last, suffocated. That is the manner by which he finished the main letter. The tall man stood and gestured to me peacefully. Then, at that point, I drove him out the front entryway. Obviously, I was shaken. How could somebody choose to impart such a horrible story to me? Day 2, the tall man remained in my yard once more, at 3 in the evening, and when I addressed, he gave me the subsequent letter. However off-put as I might have been by the principal letter, I found that as I sat sitting in front of the TV that evening, I was unable to shake the story from my head. Yet again, I required the subsequent letter and drove its deliverer to the kitchen table. I needed more. What word does equity to the idea of the subsequent letter? Dim, curved, frantic. The yellow paper was overflowing with drawings of sad figures crouched in corners and minuscule bodies spread out in pools of pencil dark. Smersesh of graphite made every one of the little doodles show up in shadows. The second page of the letter was only one major drawing. A lady's face turned up in torment, her mouth hanging open and her throat pressed brimming with slimy parasites. Bugs enveloped with her hair, destroys whipping from her eyes. Her hands got a handle on her own face. Barbed nails dove into her cheeks. That subsequent letter gave a name to the devil. Grimdeed the abuser. I looked up frequently from the letter to the man sitting across the table from me. Did he know the horrible story I was being told? Is that why it was essential to such an extent that he was available when I read it? His delicate grin never floundered, never blurred, as he glanced inactively around my kitchen. Fitz explained his drop into frenzy about the weepy call he made to 911 as he remained over the dead collections of his loved ones. He discussed the preliminary and how, even in the court, Grimdeed sat behind him at the respondent's table and talked curses about everybody present. Grimdeed requested that Fitz go after the bailiff's weapon at the finish of the preliminary, and Fitz did. This led to a short beating. Grimdeed said that Fitz ought to remain at the entryway of his cell, shouting foulness and undermining the watchman. This led to a more extended beating. Grimdeed advised Fitz to spit at the appointed authority the following day at preliminary, and, however crushed as Fitz's unfortunate inner voice seemed to be by the devil's steady impact, he did. The letter finished with another drawing. This season, the entire court tossed with butchered attorneys, and the adjudicator hung over his stand. Every last bit of it was in the spread dark of pencil lead with squalid fingerprints compressed onto yellow paper. On the third day, I was perched on the base step right inside the entryway, hanging tight for 3 o'clock. Exactly on schedule, the dispatch showed up, and without a word between us, I let him stroll through the entryway. He set the third letter on the kitchen table and plunked down. His grin was more splendid today, more extensive than expected. I could guess by his disposition that this should be the last letter. I stripped the envelope open and sat with a steaming espresso at my elbow. In his third letter, Fitz discussed his days in jail, how even in his imprisonment, Grimdeed the victimizer tormented him. He portrayed how slow capital punishment process took, how he might pass on from advanced age in his jail cell well before an execution date was set. His handwriting turned into a scarcely readable scrawl. His composing was frenzied. He was a rodent, caught in an enclosure, being nudged continually by the savage thoughts of Grimdeed the victimizer. Fitz's mental stability had long passed. He doodled himself, spreading something on the walls of his cell with his hands. "I expect dung." Fitz said he was contemplating ripping his ears off with the expectation that he would stun himself and get away Grimdeed's murmurs. The business index had stains on them from Fitz's tears. He was sorry for that. Then, on the last page, a flash of trust. Yet again, as though he had halted and collected himself. His penmanship turned out to be perfect and clear. The last lines read, "Grimdeed has become exhausted with me. Being secured this way, I can't do a lot of malicious things deserving of him. He let me know how to end my revile. Indeed, no, the revile goes on forever precisely. For this reason, I'm keeping in touch with you, to give the revile to its next casualty. Be that as it may, since I actually have a bit of mankind left in me, I'll essentially tell you how it's finished. You make another person get Grimdeed's revile the same way I did, by welcoming him into your home multiple times." My heart froze. I wouldn't even play with the possibility of breathing as I turned upward from Fitz's provoking mark toward the finish of the letter to find the tall man gazing at me. His eyes were an unending dark. That brutal smile was more extensive than any time in recent memory. "Light the letter ablaze," Grimdeed requested.